Your neighbor tells you about the unstable man in the cul-de-sac who claims to have been abducted by aliens. And then there's the woman in town who claims to see Bigfoot all the time. Your boss, who you greatly admire, confides in you that he has started speaking with his wife daily when he gets home from work. She died 8 years ago. It's hard to believe this stuff, and you write these stories off as overactive imaginations. Are these people seeking attention, or are they a bit unstable? No matter what you think, if you're like me, you walk away wondering, what if that was true? The What If It's True podcast features stories by ordinary people like you and me. Something has happened to them, something so strange they are in agony unless they tell others. My name is Cameron Buckner, and the What If It's True podcast is available at whatifitstruepodcast.com and on all available podcast apps.
Welcome to Beast TV. What was that? You better get a fresh dip and buckle up. Welcome to Beast TV, and we want to I see that we have some new people in chat tonight, and you are our honored guest, and we are so glad that you tuned in. We've got a fantastic show tonight. So with that, how you doing tonight, Larry?
I'm doing great. Ready to get into the show.
I tell you, when Larry Porch gets excited about something, he rubs those hands. And I'm excited tonight because tonight we get to talk about the North American Wood Ape Conservancy, better known as NAWAC.
Yes, and as Mr. Bob Strains told me, not NAWAC.
I tell you, Bob and Kathy Strain was one of our favorite guests that we've had on here. Bob is just so funny, yeah. And to be able to listen to his banter off the air and his humor, I mean, we're cut from the same cloth. But we've got another member from the NAWAC. So, Larry, why don't you go ahead and introduce our guest?
Yes, sir. Our guest tonight is Mr. Angelo Landrum from the NAWAC.
Howdy from Texas, y'all.
Hello.
Welcome. Man, we are just thrilled to have you on tonight, and can't wait to get started and hear more about Area X. But before we get started, Angelo, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay, I'm 59 years old. Been hunting and fishing since I was 6. I've hunted all over Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas, and now Oklahoma. I grew up in Galveston, Texas, and worked for a large insurance and financial services company in Galveston, Texas. Been there almost 30 years.
that's one thing I admire about the NAWAC is y'all are all professionals from different professions across the whole. I mean, you got scientists, you got businessmen, you name it, just regular people also. But how did you go from your profession to doing Bigfoot research?
Well, I've always been interested in the subject. I have several books and magazines from my childhood. Of course, as you can see on the wall here, I'm in my man cave, but you can see the different movie posters and memorabilia and such. But saw these at the theater as a kid. You know, I grew up being a monster kid. I watched monster movies, you know, the classic Universal films. You see something like The Legend of Augie Creek, and, you know, it was shocking because it was kind of close to home. But, you know, when you're hunting, well, when you're young, made a little interesting first couple of hunts after seeing that movie. But throughout the years, you just kind of realize that, you know what's out there. You know what nature is. You know what animals are indigenous to specific areas where you're hunting, and you just kind of take things at stride. But I basically love to fish, brought my kids up fishing, ended up on a very nice lease in between Highland and Winnie, Texas. It was called the Spindletop Bass Club, and some of the best bass fishing I've ever done in my life, and duck hunting. And in September of 2008, we had Hurricane Ike give us what for, and pretty much wiped that lease out. I can remember, you know, the week after the storm, being behind a chainsaw for God knows how long. And my cousin George Jones from Louisiana was helping me out, and we decided to take a break from cutting wood and clearing brush and all that bunch of stuff, and hooked up the boat and went to Spindletop just to see, you know, if it was still there. Sad situation. It's a 6-mile boat trip from the ramp to the lease, and we saw things that you just couldn't even imagine. All of the fences on the way to Winnie looked like Mardi Gras floats from all the debris and everything caught in the fences. Yeah. And once we got onto Spindletop Bayou, you had cows bloated 8 feet up in the tree, you know, that didn't survive the storm. And when we got to Spindletop, which is a tract of land flooded, it was established back in 1954 as a bass hatchery and now a lease. It was gone, basically. The only water that was in it, reached down and grabbed a handful, was saltwater. Those bass basically got washed from there all the way up to I-10. So, you know, it was lost. I had heard about a place called Caddo Lake, and it's at the Texas-Louisiana border, and I always wanted to go. And did some research and ended up renting a cabin, and took our son, and he was 11, 12 years old at the time. And we ended up in March of 2009 going to bass fish on Caddo Lake, and absolutely loved it. Met a friend of a friend who's become a good friend of mine now. Was invited back that summer. So instead of staying in a rented cabin, he had us stay in his guest cabin. And he had showed us a lot of the lake when we were there back in March. But in June of 2009, there was one spot that I wanted to go to called Carter Lake, which is pretty much well across from the state park there in Caddo Lake, across Big Cypress. It's about a 4 or 5 mile boat trip from his house. And I could remember fishing the full moon out there that Saturday night. And there's a restaurant there called Big Pines Lodge that burned. Mm-hmm. And I remember when we came out 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning and passed it, it was still smoldering. So 2 days later, we were back at that same spot fishing. We got up really early, got out there as the sun was coming up. We had to go through this place called Smith Slough. On one side of Smith Slough was a place called Hell's Half Acre, and on the other side was a place called Horse Island. And in Smith Slough, there was a bunch of lily pads that I wanted to hit early in the morning. Well, our son had bought a video camera at a very early age. He's a skateboarder, and he just loved that video camera, and he brought it. So as we're cruising through Smith Slough at a pretty slow pace, we had the big engine going, but we're going pretty slow. We passed something that just, I mean, it almost smelled like death. And you can even hear me in the video going, damn, that smells nasty. No, I'm sorry about the potty word on your podcast, but anyway, we got to the spot where I wanted to start fishing, and I'd shut down the big engine and got the trolling motor out. I'm on the front of the boat, and I started catching, small to medium-sized bass. And I turned around and looked, and there's my son sitting in the pedestal on the back of the boat with his camera out. And I said, son, get that dang camera put up, get a rod in your hand. That's what we're here to do, and let's catch some fish. So he crawled down and put it in the gear bag under the console and got back up and started casting. And at this time, Caddo was about to experience a 20-year flood. The water was pretty high, so a lot of the woods were flooded, and the current had the water going at a pretty good clip. So other than guiding the boat away from the banks, there wasn't much trolling I had to do.
Yeah,
it was quiet. You could hear the cardinals and the wrens and, your morning sounds, and all of a sudden, we hear somebody walking through the water. And there was a berm to our right. I'm standing up so I could see over the berm, and I could see a wake, but I really couldn't see anything at the time. And I'm looking and thinking, it's June. There shouldn't be any hunters out here unless they're hog hunting. What's going on here? And when we got closer, it's quartering away from us. I could see that it wasn't a hunter. It wasn't a man. It was an animal. I didn't get a very good look at it, but what I saw was probably from mid-calf to, high thigh area as it's wading through the water. And I looked back at my son and I said, get your camera out now. And he jumped back down and got under the console and got the camera out and started filming. And he could not, it was so thick, really focus on anything. But then all of a sudden he goes, I see it. And I said, what do you see? He goes, I see its legs. I said, well, describe it. He goes, they're this big. And he holds his little hands out. Well, it's much bigger than my legs, of course.
Yeah.
And I remember asking him, I said, what color are they? Because I could kind of see the color. And he said, kind of a brownish gray. And that's exactly what I saw. It was like a swamp rabbit gray. And It was moving away from us. And I noticed at the time, I told you about the morning sounds. As this thing's walking away from us overhead, the crows are circling and cawing as it's going back. And I tried to reposition the boat in the current and turn it around and troll back to that area so we could get a better look at it. And you could hear this thing kind of pick up its pace a little bit. And it started moving a little faster and move further back. And then we started hearing brush crunch and then large branches kind of breaking. I guess it got to higher ground and crawled out. And then that was it. And we were dumbfounded. I had my son just like myself. I had him out duck hunting when he was a little guy, and he's already killed his first hog. And, we're used to seeing nature, and we couldn't explain what the heck we just saw. Now, if you ever been to Caddo Lake, you'll know that there's little to no cell service out there. So we finally got to about the middle of Carter Lake where I can call my friend. And he tried to shrug it off. Oh, that's just that old bear people's been seeing back there. That was a couple of deer swimming in tandem. He came up with every excuse in the world. But we hightailed it back to him. And when we got there, it was he and his wife, his two sons, one of the son's wives and the other son's girlfriend, and another friend of his. And they all just kind of laughed at us. And I felt like the stupid tourists sitting there trying to explain what we saw, but they thought it was funny. Yeah. So we ate and visited with them a bit, got back in the boat and hauled back out there to go fishing again. And we decided we'd go back to the same spot. And now we're in shorts and flip-flops, and we were going to try and see if we could see any tracks in the mud or anything else. Well, we could see from the berm when it first happened that it was all water. You could see a muddy trail where the thing had gone through. Yeah. So I doubted that there was any chance of us seeing any tracks or anything. But what happened while we were out there was we saw a couple deer swimming in tandem. And my son actually got one. I think one of the slides that I got you was one of the deer swimming, to get up on the high ground. So it pretty much changed the perspective on, what I thought about quote unquote Bigfoot. And I really don't like calling it that, but when you see something that's a live animal and you think, man, this was a joke, not too long ago, and all of a sudden this is the real deal. And you're just kind of dumbfounded as to what this animal could be. So then I got back, of course. My wife probably would have written me off as, nuttier than a squirrel turd had my son not seen it and told her exactly what he saw. Right. Started getting on the internet and looking up this and looking up that, pulled out some of my old books. And when I'm saying old books, I've got the Reader's Digest that my grandparents had that came out about the time that the Argosy magazine, which you can see on the back wall here, that's just a cover shot of it. But I actually have the magazine as well, came out. And I started looking at things, and some of the things I saw out there on the internet were a little sketchy, a little weird, but some of it seemed pretty legit. And was flipping channels on the TV one night. That was about the time that there was a TV show called Monster Quest out. Mm-hmm. And saw an episode called Swamp Stalker. And it was about the Texas Bigfoot Research Conservancy and what they were doing to try and prove the existence of this animal. And I thought, oh, dang, these guys seem to know what they're doing. This is pretty cool. So I think I reached out to Jerry Heston via email. I probably still have that email somewhere. And then Mike Mays, who y'all might know as the Texas Cryptid Hunter. It's got a neat little blog site and has authored a couple of nice books. And the Texas Bigfoot Research Conservancy was doing a community outreach in the Houston area. So got my son in the truck and off we went and met him. Yeah. And come to find out, within about a few months, they were having a conference in Tyler, Texas. So there I went. And that's where I actually met Bob and Kathy Strain. I've never been in the field with them other than being friends on social media and talking back and forth. You know, it's not like they come over for chicken on Sundays or something after church. So anyway, I had bought Kathy's book, Giants, Cannibals, and Monsters. Met Jeff Meldrum, met a few of the other speakers there, and Bob Gimlin was actually at that conference. But the best thing about it was I got to meet the Texas Bigfoot Research Conservancy, and it kind of opened my eyes that, you know, considering what I'd read on the internet with some of the, you know, people out there, these guys seem, you know, really legit, and they were really serious about what they were doing. So I think a year went by and I went to another conference. Well, in that year that went by, I had bought game cameras. I had 5 game cameras that I had placed in different areas on Horse Island and one in the WMA that I maintained for a little over 4 years. And that's a lot of work. You know, the cost of the cameras, and then your larger SD cards at the time weren't cheap. I mean, you know, this is old technology now, but it was, you know, semi-new technology back then. I couldn't afford the nice Reconics that I saw that, you know, they were using or anything, but I got these game cams, and every 4 months I was going out there and doing camera maintenance on them. Well, that means I was hauling a boat up to Uncertain, Texas. That's all that gas and all that time and, you know, traipsing around through the woods. But I got to learn the lake pretty good, fish while I was there. And sad thing is, the only thing I ever caught on camera that was bipedal were some poachers, which I got on film. But anyway, got a call from my friend in Uncertain after I went to the second TBRC conference. And he said, I went to the post office today and the game warden stopped me. The game warden wants to talk to you. And I'm like, oh, really? What about? She wants to know why you got the cameras in the woods bolted to the trees. Well, if you can find the shot of the actual cameras, I'd made some custom security boxes so they couldn't get stolen. I saw another episode on Monster Quest with Jeff Meldrum in a cabin up in Canada somewhere. And they had laid basically a board full of screws across the doormat, hoping to get some DNA off these animals.
Right.
So I constructed my camera boxes. They had 180 screws poking out of the top and all sides in the front. And yes, the boxes themselves were bolted to the trees, but I didn't want anybody stealing them. And like I said, it's a lot of work. You go back to open these cameras, and there's red wasp in there, black widows, brown recluse. Sometimes you go back and see that a piece of moss is blown across the front of them, and you don't have really anything but a bunch of, you know, distorted stuff from the wind and the moss. I did notice that all the animals that I ever caught on film at night, their eyes glowed, which means that they either could see the IR or it was possibly the flash going off. Well, that 5th camera I had didn't have a flash on it. And I noticed that all the animals I caught on that camera, their eyes glowed as well. I thought that was kind of strange. So I went up there and met with the game warden, and she proceeded to tell me that she could find me and basically for bolting things to her trees in the WMA. And I said, well, ma'am, you got signs bolted to these trees all over the place. What's the difference between what you're doing and what I'm doing? She didn't like that too much. So I had bought some tree patch, And I went out to all 5 cameras and removed them and patched the holes and took pictures to show her what I had done. And thus ended my quote unquote research in Caddo Lake.
Yeah.
So shortly after that, I decided to join the Texas Bigfoot Research Conservancy, which had just become the North American Wood Ape Conservancy. And they moved their operation. Basically, they had been in the Big Thicket, which is about 70 miles from where I am right now, to southeastern Oklahoma. The neat thing about the North American Wood Ape Conservancy is how much you learn when you become a member. Basically, I went to their training camps. I learned wilderness first aid. I met some of the neatest people you'd ever want to meet in your life. And these are, professionals, like you said. We've got people in the medical field, aviation field, biologists, scientists, everyday businessmen, people with law enforcement background and military background, and you name it, it's there. And they all have a great skill set that they bring to the table. And the neat thing about it is it's run as a tight-knit team.
Yeah.
Everybody works as a team. And you find out right off the bat that there is no I in team there. You may have some people who seem to be alpha at first, but they're there not only to educate you, but to keep you safe and to keep the others safe. While we're out there, I mean, our lives are in each other's hands. There's all kinds of things that can go wrong when you're in a place that's so remote. You could step out of the cabin and step on a rock wrong and bust your ankle, and then you're pretty much well out of luck. So it was just a real neat feeling when I met these people that I found a place where I belong. Because when I told the people at work about this, again, some of them just wrote me off as being crazy. You can't unsee something like that. I didn't want to see it. I didn't plan to see it. It just happened. And I got so curious, it was almost like an obsession to figure out what these animals were. So once I joined the North American Wood Ape Conservancy, it was a whole new world. And they opened my eyes to quite a few things. And you find out that when you hear things from these people about their experiences there, Hollywood can't make that stuff up. It would blow you away. But most of what we basically document there is typical great ape behavior. There's no getting around it. The rock throws, the bluff charges, the nut cracking stations that have been found, the noises that they make, the grunts, the whoops, the mouth pops. I mean, it all seems to fit into basically being some sort of great ape. It is just an undiscovered, undocumented species. And the North American Wood Ape Conservancy, basically, it's a 501c3 tax-exempt nonprofit scientific research organization recognized by the IRS, and it's volunteers, and all the time and all the money we put into what we do out there, it comes out of our pocket, basically. I could remember taking my wife to a year-end meeting in Oklahoma, and she got to hear our chairman of the board at the time was Alton Higgins, and she got to hear Dr. Angelo Caparella speak, and Paul Bowman Jr., and a few others. And on the way home, she said, "Look, I understand now you're not with a bunch of, people who are out chasing fairies or something. This is a real animal. But you got to stop spending so much dang money. We got kids going to college, and she was right. So it's not cheap, and it's not easy either. I mean, sitting going out camping with the guys or your wife and family. This is some pretty remote stuff out there. And everybody works as a team when you're out there, and everybody pulls their own weight. So anyway,
Well,
that's some of the gear, if you're looking at that I used to carry with me out of Caddo Lake.
Talking about the North American Wood Ape Conservancy, that Larry and I discuss the NAWAC very often. It's one of our favorite groups. It's one of probably the most credible group that's out there, and the accomplishments that they have, that y'all have had, is just amazing. And I know we want to get into that, but before we do, I would just like to read their mission statement. And it is to investigate and conduct research regarding the existence of the unlisted primate species we refer to as the wood ape, also known as Sasquatch or Bigfoot, to facilitate scientific, official, and government recognition, conservation, and protection of the species and its habitat, and to help further factual education and understanding to the public regarding the species, with a focus on the continent of North America. That is probably the best mission statement that I have ever read as far as a Bigfoot group. And it just amazes me I'm going to post in chat right now the website to the NAWAC, and it is just simply amazing with what the evidence that y'all have collected, and the reports, and your database, and the research, and the news that y'all have shared with the public. And like you said earlier, it's one of the, if not the only, .org Bigfoot group that is out there.
Well, we don't sell anything, that's for sure. We don't hawk t-shirts. We do a lot of documentation. That's what we're out there to do. And we do education to the public outreach. But it's all about the conservancy. And basically, when you go to a place that has 100-year-old growth forest, and some of the places we go, you don't see any trash or leaf litter, debris out there that's not natural. And the places where humans go, though, then you'll see the trash and the clear cutting, which just hurts my heart when I see, these beautiful mountains, and it looks like God gave them a crew cut all of a sudden, and they've just taken out all these trees, and they're destroying the habitat of these animals and many more. This one picture you see right here, this is a section that is a natural rock formation that got damaged within the past couple of years. I wasn't too happy about that. But you just would not believe what the Ouachitas has to offer as far as habitat goes. And it's one of the wildest places I've ever been to. It's like almost like a tropical rainforest. It's humid. It's Oklahoma is a hot place. And then at night it gets down, 55, 60 degrees. It is just absolutely amazing. When I first went to Area X, the thing that got to me was the foxes were walking right into camp. It's like they didn't know what humans were, and they just kind of walk around and look at you. They'd circle you a little bit. One of them even ran in my tent. Deer. I've seen deer that just walk up and sit there and look at you. You don't see that much around here. They're too skittish and scared of people. But we are all about the conservancy. And once we can finally document the species and it gets recognized, then it's all going to be about the conservancy. It's all going to be about conservation. And in my honest opinion, and this is me talking, and I'm not talking for anybody else, we're messing with somebody's money. There's the timber company out there, and there's hunting clubs and landowners and stuff that probably don't want these things recognized. Fish and game or whatever, it's just something else they have to manage. I've personally talked to some parks people and some people that work for timber companies that basically said the subject's taboo and it's a job killer. You don't talk about it. I thought for sure at my place of employ that it was going to be a job killer, but it wasn't. It went from, this guy's nuts to they'll see something on the news or something on the internet and they'll come and ask me if this is legit or not.
Yeah.
So they've pretty much well come to realize that, I'm not some Fruit Loop and this is what I do. And I enjoy doing it. I'm sure my wife would rather not hear the word quote unquote Bigfoot or Sasquatch or wood ape or whatever so much, but it's something that happened to me and this is what I do. And it has become more than an obsession. Sad to say, in these days and times, I have not been in the field in almost 2 years, and it's killing me. My wife works for a hospital. We're now empty nesters. It's a 7-8 hour drive for me just to get there and another couple hours to get into the valley. If something were to happen to my wife, I can't be that far away from her right now. So until things turn around a little bit, I guess I'm stuck here. My little man cave.
Well, hopefully
you see this picture right here. This is what they're doing out there. They are clear cutting, and it is just, it hurts my heart to see that.
Yeah.
In the drive to that area, you're starting to see a lot more clear cutting. Not in actual Area X, but just to that area, coming from Texas. The further you get through Oklahoma, you start seeing all this clear cutting all over the place.
Tell us about some of your experiences at Area X.
Well, I was green and ignorant, and I knew what we were there to do, which is to document the species and to try and obtain a type specimen. And for those who don't know what I'm talking about, science has to have a type specimen to study before it could actually recognize and say that this is now a legitimate animal. There are some people out there, sad to say, that, think that this is a solitary animal that rides around on a unicorn or something chasing fairies. And it is, it's a species of animals. They're everywhere. They, as far as I've read, can be from South America all the way up through Canada and other parts of the world as well. But there are several places in the United States where these animals are. I've talked to people. There are, people that I meet just here at the house. My tree cutter, Billy, neat guy. He's from New Jersey. He's had 2 encounters up in New Jersey. I mean, you meet people from all over the place that have had encounters. And they're, again, just ordinary folks who have seen these animals. So let's get back to Area X. I was in Area X for the first time in 2015. I went in with Alton Higgins. I followed him in. It's a grueling drive to get there in 4-wheel drive. You put a lot of wear and tear on a vehicle there. You're basically rock crawling. My truck has Oklahoma racing stripes down both sides of it from going through the trees, and it's a long, grueling but beautiful drive in. And we got to the place that we were leasing at the time, and Alton is starting to show me the ropes. And this is like 3 or 3:30 in the afternoon up on the mountain. I hear the coyotes start to go off, and then all of a sudden they just cut off real quick. And then I heard them over to the right on the mountain start up and then cut off again. And something just didn't sound right. It sounded like coyotes, but I've never heard coyotes go off during the day like that. And something was just a little odd about it. So Alton and I were waiting for 3 other team members. The first night there, I pitched a 9x13 tent. I'm a bit arachnophobic. I did not want to sleep in the cabin, so I basically slept in my tent. And the things I heard that night were just amazing. I heard things walking through the campsite. I heard noises that I couldn't understand. It sounded like somebody was dragging a very large cooler across the rocks. This whole time, as thin as the walls of that cabin were, I could hear Alton in there snoring. And I'm hearing all these things go on. The next day, I told Alton about what I'd heard and everything. And he showed me around a little more. And the other 2 team members, Shannon Graham and Shannon Mason, showed up. And the 4 of us went on a hike. And we hiked all the way up the mountain to where our campsite backed up to, and back down the mountain. And we were waiting for the 5th team member, Travis Lawrence, to show up. So I had come up with a plan to put a tree stand on the outside of camp, not go back to it for a couple of days, and then spend the night in that tree stand. So Alton and I went out there and put the tree stand up. That night, I could remember hearing things again running around the camp. Thump, 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 and, just noises I'd never heard before. And I remember hearing a rock slide on the mountain about 3:30 in the morning. And these weren't small rocks. These are antelope-sized, pretty good sized rocks coming down the mountain. And then it sounded like a slide, and something caught its footing. And then I heard thump, 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 thump running behind the cabin. And I was just absolutely blown away. I'm like, what in the heck could navigate such rough terrain out here and run off like that. So Travis Lawrence shows up afterwards. We talk about the plan. He looks at the tree stand and he says, how high did you put that? I said, I only put it at 12 foot because I've got this sprig of branches coming out and it'll hide me, if anything were to look up. And Travis goes, well, didn't you think that an 8-foot plus animal couldn't just reach up and touch you? And I'm like, thanks a lot, Travis. Between that and the pinata joke he made, I felt a little insecure.
Yeah.
But we had some things go on during the day as well. We had something that kept banging on something metal that we kept hearing. And that was odd. And it's almost like these things were playing with us because you'd hear something go on over here and we'd go to see what it was. And then all of a sudden you'd hear something going on over here. That went on for a while. And that night we were sitting around camp in the dark, no fire. And I had a Gen 2 night vision binocular. And I think Shannon Mason had her night vision binocular. And Travis had the 4570 with the ATN Thor on it. We're looking around. And all of a sudden, this bright light just blinded me. I'm like, what the heck was that? And I looked again, and what it was a reflective sign. And I think the IR from my monocular caught that reflective sign, and that's what blinded me. So then I'm looking around again, and all of a sudden there's a really, really bright light. And I said, who shined that bright light? And Alton goes, nobody shined a light. And Travis says, yeah, I saw it too. And we looked over, and it's Shannon Mason with her little Gen 1. And I assumed that the light generated from that Gen 1 was what both Travis and I saw. So I'm starting to put 2 and 2 together here that maybe these things can see at night. I don't know. I don't know enough about them to, just other than guess that that's what's going on. So we had put together a plan where the next night, Travis and one of the team members was going to go in one direction with a lantern. Alton in another, I think Alton was with Shannon Graham, and they went in another direction with a lantern. And I stayed in my tent in the dark. This was like 1:30, going on 2 o'clock in the morning. And I was already dressed. I put my tree harness on. I had a 4570 on me and a 357 on my waist. And in the dark, I walked to the tree stand. I also had an Olympus sound recorder on an armband on my sleeve. And I very carefully and quietly crawled up into my tree stand, strapped in, sat down, let things settle out. Pretty soon I saw a light coming down this trail, and it was Graham and Alton Higgins coming back towards camp. And when they finally got back to camp, Graham and Mason were staying in this tent outside of the cabin, and I could see the glow of the orange tent. I think that's a tent that Alton had set up, while Alton Higgins and Travis Lawrence are inside of this cabin with the ATN Thor. So about 3:15 in the morning, I had never heard a wood knock before. I'm sitting there and I started hearing movement off in the distance, and it was on both sides of me, and just brush moving, no definitive footsteps or anything else. And all of a sudden I hear this whack, and it's like if you took the biggest piece of firewood you could think of and you hit a tree. And my heart sunk, and I'm like, oh heck, it's fixing to get real. And I kept hearing movement coming up from behind me on both sides, coming up. And it took me a while to remember this because this has gone through my mind so many times. But I remember they were walking in like a line. And how I knew it was they is they stopped. And all of a sudden I heard, a mouth pop. And I've heard people talk about mouth pops before, but I heard, and then I heard, and I'm like, oh, hell, here it comes. And I'm sitting in my tree stand and taking the safety off the 4570. I remembered when I crawled up in the tree stand and I had that sound recorder on me, I pushed record and I could see the little red light glowing, and I brought a little piece of black electrical tape and I put that over the red light. So I'm like, great, maybe I'm going to get all this on tape. So I started hearing more movement. I never heard anything under me or directly around me, but I could see shapes moving between me and the orange glow of the tent that Mason and Graham were in. And I kept hearing movement in the brush, and then all of a sudden I heard what sounded like a large rock hitting a pile of rocks and rocks scattering. And I was like shocked. And I'm sitting there trying to concentrate on that. And all of a sudden I got buck fever. I hadn't had buck fever since I was a kid. My breathing went nuts. I couldn't control my breathing. My legs were shaking. My arms were shaking. And I sat there, and the first thing I did, of course, it's so dark, you can't see your hand in front of your face. So I'm sitting there with a cocked weapon in my lap, and I'm in a true spec uniform. And I basically tried putting my hand over my mouth, and that didn't stop the heavy breathing. So I put my mouth in the crook of my arm with the true spec uniform, and that didn't stop it either. And finally, I just craned my head straight up, and I could see up this tree that I was in, and I could see the moonlight bathing off the leaves. And all of a sudden, below me, I heard what I could only describe as a Brahma bull breathing. And it was a real heavy, and I just about freaking lost it. And I just, that was one of those squirt of great moments that you're stuck and there's nothing you could do, but I couldn't control myself. And I'm like, how in the hell could something have got under me? I never heard it walk up. I never heard the brush move. Unless this damn thing knuckle walked or something, I never heard it get under me. But there was no mistaking what I was hearing, and it was this heavy breathing. And like I said, I lost it. I'm sitting there praying to God to do the right thing. And I thought, I'm failing my mission here. All I had to do was stand up in that tree stand. I had a light on the end of my weapon. Turn that green light on and fulfill what I was there to do. And I could not control myself. And I prayed to God to do the right thing. And I thought, okay, if this damn thing comes up the tree, I'm going to have to defend myself. There's no getting around that. But I'm just going to sit here and see what happens. And probably within 2 to 3 minutes, a big calm came over me. And things started to settle out. I didn't hear the thing breathing. I didn't hear it walk away or anything else. It got real quiet. My breathing was back to normal. I was no longer shaking like I was. And then all of a sudden I heard something come from the right, and it was bam, bam, bam. And it was a rock that was thrown from right to left that went through the trees and hit the trail below me. Well, everything in Oklahoma is rock. So I heard the rock bounce. And then right after that, I heard, and then something hit the leaf litter, and it was a branch that was thrown from left to right. And I'm like, they're trying to see what I'm going to do. And I just sat there. And I never heard any more movement for a while after that until it started to get light. And it was right around 5:30 or so when it started getting light enough for me to start seeing things and not just pitch black. And I was hearing movement on both sides of me, but something was coming up my 6, and I was getting nervous again, and my heart started going. And all of a sudden I looked towards camp, and I saw this bright glowing light moving at me, bouncing down the trail. And it was Travis and Alton with a lantern or a flashlight or whatever. And I remembered I said, please come get me out of that tree at 5:30 in the morning. And they did. And it took a while for me to, at that point, I was a mess. I was shaking. Get my weapon down and get myself down and everything. And we went back to the cabin, and Alton interviewed me. I told him what had happened. And at that point, Travis goes, well, I'm going on patrol. I said, where are you going? He goes, well, I'm going to go down to the creek and do this and do that. And I said, I want to go. And he goes, are you sure? And I said, yeah, I want to go. And he says, okay, no noise discipline. You stay about 20 yards behind me, one step at a time. And just, we're going to be quiet. And off we went. And by this time, the sun wasn't up, but it was light, and there was a mist. I can remember that because everything's so damp there. We walked away from where we were and started walking down the creek and towards the creek. And all of a sudden, there's a bend in the trail. Travis kind of disappeared for a while there, and I see Travis again. He's all the way down to this creek. Well, there's a gate I had to cross. When I got to that gate, the smell hit me. It smelled like if you're at the Houston Zoo and you walk past the primate section, that smell just hit me like a brick. And I looked around, was on a full alert, didn't see anything, didn't hear anything, but there was no mistaking that smell. Got down to the next creek area, and I thought Travis had put his hand up and pointed this way. He was actually telling me to stop. He proceeded on. I thought he said to go to the right, so I went to the right, which was towards the trail that took us back up the mountain. I'm alone. I had a radio on me with the earbud in, and I'm walking, and all of a sudden it sounded like if you were in a football stadium and you hear somebody yell, but you can't tell where it's coming from because of the echo. And what I heard was this god awful, it wasn't a roar, it wasn't a yell, it was kind of but it just went on forever. And it just, I was shocked. And about that time, Travis calls me on the radio. And again, that startled me. And he goes, where are you at? And I told him, and he goes, why? I said, I thought you told me to go to the right. He goes, no, I told you to stop. And I said, did you hear that yell? And he goes, what yell? I said, did you hear that yell? He says, I can't hear anything but running creek. I'm in the creek. I said, well, where are you going? And he told me. So I said, okay, I'll meet you back at camp. So I started back, and of course I'm on alert. Got to that gate again and didn't smell anything. But when I was going around that bend where I lost Travis the first time, I'm standing in the center of the trail, and probably 35, 40 yards in front of me is a doe sitting there wagging her tail, eating grass. And here's a man standing here with a gun, and the dang doe is just looking at me and minding its own business. And all of a sudden, off to my left, I hear what sounds like either a stick break or crack or something. And that doe went on full alert. Tail flashed up. She turned around. She looked. That hoof came down. She bolted. She ran within, I'd say, 10 feet of me at a dead run, hauling butt. And I just sat there and stared. I could not see anything. And it was, looking towards the mountain. I didn't see a thing. I probably stood there 10 or 15 minutes. And by then that was done. I got back to camp. I lost it in front of my teammates. Couldn't sleep. Just was fried. Was done with it. We had to go out of the valley at one point to get some supplies, and we all piled in my truck, and I drove, and there's a tree down in front of us on the trail, blocking the trail. We never heard a tree fall or anything, but there it was. It wasn't there when Travis came in, but there's this tree. So I hooked a strap up to it. We all got the tree out of the way and got out of the valley and called Daryl Collier to report what was going on and what had happened. And I lost it again, was just, I couldn't control myself. And the thing that Daryl said to me that stuck the most is to channel that fear. And basically, part of it was in the anger, but that's what got me through the next day or so before we left the valley. And things got a little better other than the fact that I couldn't sleep. The day before we left, we knew it was going to rain, and it was a bad rainstorm. They told me to come into the cabin. I wouldn't do it. I wanted to stay in my tent. I'm probably, I don't know, good 7-8 feet away from the side of the cabin in this tent. The back of the tent faced the mountain. The front of the tent faced out. It started raining. And here it goes again. I hear splash, 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 splash running through camp. And I kept hearing movement. And finally, at one point, I'm in my cot closer to the cabin. And I start hearing that breathing again. And it's right outside my tent. And I froze. But my first thought was, I've got a 45-70 across my chest. I very slowly tried to roll out of my cot, and it made like a short popping sound, and whatever it was left. So I put a camp chair in the center of my tent, and I was facing the back of the tent. It's pouring down rain. I've got the 45-70 in my lap and the 357 on my waist. And all of a sudden, the whole back wall of the tent just went. I don't know if the animal put mud or water or whatever and threw it, but that whole tent just in back. And I'm going to tell you what, we were going to pack up the next morning. I was the first person packed. I was ready to get the hell out of there. And I did. And I've never experienced anything like that in my life. But got back on the horse shortly after that and went back in with Paul Bowman Jr. And we were going to meet another team member who I'll call Doc, who was coming in. He lives pretty close to me. So Paul Bowman Jr. and I were in there alone for a while. We had relieved 4 other team members. And once those 4 team members left, it was almost like ding dong ditch. We had noises over here, banging over here. It was like they were playing with us because there were just 2 of us. And one day I remember Paul and I sitting on the porch of this cabin. And I said, can I wood knock? And he says, sure. One of our members, Gene Bass, had built this awesome log bench there. And I picked up a bat and I walked over to that bench and I whacked it, and it was like ha ha hee hee and everything. And I went back and sat on the porch. And all of a sudden, it was like somebody threw a goddamn Volkswagen off the cliff. I mean, I'd never heard anything like that in my life. Bowman and I jumped off that porch and we're looking. We're trying to see if it was a tree that fell or a boulder or what. We couldn't figure out what it was. And I said it had to be, an earthquake or, tectonic shift plate or plate shift or something. I said, he goes, no, it wasn't. He goes, look. And I said, what do you mean? He goes, look at all the stuff hanging on the porch. Did you see any of that stuff moving? And I said, no. I don't know what it was. Other members have experienced that same thing before, but like I said, it sounded like a Volkswagen got thrown off that cliff. I don't know what caused it. We had a interesting trip there until Bowman got sick and he went to retire one night in the cabin, and Doc was in his area of the cabin and I was in the front room. I moved this bed away from this big window. There was no covering on it or anything else, and laid in the middle of that bed with that 45-70 staring at that window. And at one point that night, it sounded like something was on the porch. I heard the cabin creak. I heard what I thought was something on the porch. I got it full alert. Doc came out of his room and I said, oh, you heard it too. And he said, heard what? And about that time, we heard whatever it was leave the porch. So we went out and looked and didn't see anything. Next morning, we're talking to Bowman. He said, Angelo, I've been here a week with you, and your snoring is pretty horrible. Don't get me wrong. I mean, it's just bad. But last night, I woke up, and I heard your snoring, but it was coming from outside the cabin. It was coming from the left. And I got up, and I got my weapon, and I was just about to light up that area. He had a light on the end of his weapon, and it stopped. And then he heard it coming from the other side, and it's like the snoring had stopped, and then all of a sudden it continued over here. Well, I damn sure wasn't outside. I don't think I snored. So, I mean, it's just another thing that happened there. About that time is when we had the radio tags out there. The radio tags were developed to affix to what we call string traps. The string traps are like a thick buttonhole thread that you would affix to one tree, tie to one tree, go across an area where you think that the animal is coming from or going to, and then wrap it around the next tree. I'm not a tall guy. I'm a whole 5'7", maybe 5'8" in my boots. Standing up, if I reach all the way up, I could barely touch the string with my fingertips. Well, there were mornings when we would find, 20 feet of string going this way, which meant from the last time that we checked the string, something had come from this direction to that direction and walked through and knocked the string trap down. So basically, our members had devised this plan, and they've got these radio tags, just like they put in a bear collar, and they're little bitty tags. The one gentleman cored them out, put the tag inside of it, maybe hot glued it, I don't know, put it back together, and so all you had was a cocklebur with this antenna sticking out, and it had a magnet hot glued to it. The other magnet was onto the string trap. when the magnets separate, that means the tag has been basically activated, and you could scan it with the antenna and go from there. We had some false readings here and there. One came down in a rainstorm, that kind of thing. But it was after I was long gone that Tag 7 got activated. And you can read all about Tag 7 and our Ouachita Project monograph on woodape.org. Basically, that tag got activated and lasted all the way through March or April of 2016. It was activated late summer 2015. And we have all the tracking data on that and everything else. And it's just amazing, what all these guys did to try and track this animal. At first, of course, we all thought, okay, maybe this could be a raptor, barred owl or hawk or something flying through there, and it gets affixed to it. I left one important detail out. To seal the deal, we actually took rat trap glue and put over the cocklebur and the antenna, which would really make it stick to something if something were to walk through it. Well, if it would have been a raptor, birds preen. I've got barred owl feathers and red-shouldered hawk feathers and everything else all over our property. Whatever this was, when the guys finally caught up with it, they couldn't keep up with it. They'd get a hit, they'd hear a wood knock, and they could not keep up with it. And they have this tracking data, and all of that information in the map is on woodape.org. It's a real interesting read. But I did not go back to Area X until 2017. In 2017, I got on an op. There were just three of us. Real neat guy named Mark Porter was on the team, and I was actually team leader. And we had a week with little to no activity at all. So it was late in the week. I wanted to go up the mountain. And Mark and I took off in the morning, and we went all the way up the mountain as far as we could go, and then came back down. It was about a 3.5 hour ordeal. Matter of fact, I can remember Mark telling me, "You ever do this to me again, I'm gonna kick your butt." And he wasn't kidding. It was grueling. But excuse me. We got back to camp and had some chow. Then we hiked about a 3-mile hike in a different direction to a place that we like to investigate. And then we came back, and then that night we did about a 1.5 mile hike, so a 3-mile round trip back in the other direction, in another area. And I tried to stay up as long as I could. Porter tried to stay up as long as he could. The other member had retired. Finally went to bed somewhere after, I guess it was 2 or so. And I had my alarm set on vibrate to wake me up at different times of the night. And I must have slept through that. But it was about 4:20 in the morning. And I just woke up and was staring straight up. And I heard movement right outside my tent. Somebody was walking away from my tent. So I immediately got up and started to unzip my tent, thinking it was Porter. As I'm doing this, I look over and I see Porter unzipping his tent and coming out. The other guy's snoring away. So whatever had come between my truck and my tent and walked out of camp. Well, Porter and I are all excited, and we're running to the edge of camp, looking around and everything with our headlamps on. About that time, Porter goes, "You got your pistol on you?" I said, "Nope." I said, "Where's yours?" He goes, "Back in my tent." I said, "I think we better walk back." About that time. But that was the only activity we had that whole trip. So there are all kinds of other instances that, the other guys could tell you. There was one time when I was out there with Daryl Collier and Matt Pruitt where we actually call blasted one night. Daryl got pretty good just vocally calling in the owls. That was pretty cool. But we started call blasting, and I think one of the sounds on one of the call blasters, and I may be wrong, I think it was a baby goat in distress. That was one of the last things we played. We all racked out, and it was somewhere around 4 something in the morning when Collier shook us awake and said, "Do you hear that? Do you hear that?" And we listened, and we didn't hear anything. And he went outside and looked around and came back in and crawled back in his sleeping bag and went to sleep. And just about the time Daryl started snoring, Pruitt and I both heard it. Walking around camp, whatever it was making the exact same noise that we heard on that call blaster, a baby goat in distress. And you just can't make that up. Man, that was some creepy stuff. But Higgins and I had a great time one time. This was before Harvey hit our area. Basically, Higgins and I were up there the week before for a week, and we had about 11 inches of rain while we were in X. I will tell you this, out in Higgins, Russ never sleeps. That man will work your you-know-what off. We took down trees. We dug trenches to divert water from going into our camp. We had all kinds of work going on. And it was, I can remember like 3 something one afternoon, it had stopped raining. And Alton walks up to me, and I'm a hot, sweaty mess. And he goes, "I'm going to hunt." And I looked at him like, "What do you mean you're going to hunt?" He told me he was going to a specific location. And he said he would be back at 7 o'clock. He wanted me to get up. I had a spot that I basically would sit and watch up on a bluff about 60 yards out of camp. And he said, "If anything follows me in, I want you to pop it." I said, "Well, I have to shower, get all my nonsense stuff on, get my hunting clothes on, everything else." I said, "I'll escort you out of camp and then double back and do all that. And then, 15 or 20 minutes later can possibly be on my spot on the bluff." So we decided radio silence, and that was our plan, and we would stick to it. I went back, had just finished cleaning up, got dressed, and was putting my boots on in the tent. And I heard the most god-awful rock throw crash you could imagine. A rock was thrown and hit the top of our metal structure that we have erected out there, which keeps our radio equipment and generator and all that bunch of stuff dry. And I mean, it was just like bam, bam, bam. And I broke radio silence, and I called Alton up. And before I could say anything, he says, "Did you hear that wood knock?" And I'm like, "Alton, that wasn't a wood knock. That was a rock hitting the top of the metal structure." And I'm whispering into my comm. And I said, "I think they're trying to see if anybody's still in camp." I didn't go running out or anything. So I'm going to stay here another 15 or 20 minutes before I go to my perch. The picture you're seeing right now is me up on the bluff in my perch. So if you're an outdoorsman or a hunter, you'll know that the squirrels can be your friend and the squirrels can be your enemy. And so can the wrens. Mm-hmm. If a squirrel busts you, they'll sit there and bark, and there's nothing you can do about it. If a wren busts you, they'll sit there and chatter and chirp and everything else, and there's nothing you can do about it. I got up into my perch, and up the mountain and behind me, I heard a squirrel bark, and it wouldn't stop. And then a little while later, a little farther out, I heard the wrens going nuts. It finally started to get dark that afternoon. It gets dark quick in the mountains. Getting close to 7 o'clock, and here comes Alton down the trail. And he's looking up, and he can't see me because I'm in full camo up on this bluff. And across the creek, paralleling Alton in the woods, it sounds like a bull coming through the woods. I mean, brush is moving, and how Alton couldn't hear that, I don't know, but he's walking back to camp, and I am sitting here, heart rate's going up and everything else, thinking I'm finally going to get a good look at one of these things. And I heard all the brush move. I never saw anything. As Alton got into camp, whatever this thing was coming through here, made a very large wood knock, which Alton heard. So the next day, Alton and I hiked up to the top of the mountain to get cell coverage and called Daryl Collier and tell him what was going on. Daryl was adamant that we get on top, or, get on a ladder and look on the top of the metal structure and retrieve any rocks that we'd find up there. If it was that loud, it has to be a big rock. It's probably going to be up there. So Alton's holding the ladder, and I got up on one side, which was the side of the mountain, looking on that part of the roof. And then we moved the ladder to the other side to now I'm facing the mountain. And I crawl up on the ladder, and I start hearing all this ruckus up the mountain, and look. And there's a dead tree, bigger, it's probably 40 yards up the mountain. A little bigger around than I could probably get my arms around, but it's a dead tree. And it is moving side by side, back and forth, like a beagle wagging its tail. And I just couldn't believe it. And Alton let go of the ladder, and he, I'm up against there, but he went to get his phone to try and film. I don't know if he got any of this on film or not, but I'm sitting here watching this thing go back and forth so violently that at one point, the whole right side of that tree broke off and came crashing down. And by that time, I'm screaming, "Do it again, do it again." I got down the ladder, and I had, I'm a redneck, I'm sorry, but I had a little pile of rocks and hickory nuts and a wrist rocket slingshot. And I started firing stuff up the mountain, and I actually hit that tree. And we didn't have any other activity after that. We cleaned up camp the next day, and we're leaving, and I'm in front of Alton, and I stop the truck and get out and to take a picture. And Alton says, "What are you doing?" And I pointed, and I said, "Look at that tree." I said, "We just walked all the way up this mountain and back down, and now there is a tree arced over the trail. I mean, we both had to drive under it. There was no windstorm or anything after the whole rock incident, and the tree wasn't like that the day before, but it was a hickory nut tree that was arched over the trail, and that's one of the pictures that you'll see on the slideshow." So, we're getting a little deep into your show, but I've got one more instance where I decided that it was time for me to face my fears. There was an op that no one was able to make, and I went out there alone and stayed a week alone. That was for the next tropical storm that we had. It did nothing but rain most of the time I was there. And I thought I was going to be passive. And I wore shorts, boots, and bright orange tops, and t-shirts and do-rags and all that bunch of stuff. And I hiked around and I did this and I did that. But every 2 hours, I would walk to the edge of camp and then take a baseball bat and slam it up against a tree. That's the only thing that I'd heard as far as a wood knock went was, a loud slam. So I was just emulating what I'd already heard. I had a truck tent, which you'll see in the slideshow that keeps going through there. But I opted to sleep in our cabin as opposed to sleeping in the truck tent. What I had done was I recorded myself snoring, made a MP3 and looped it. And I had remote control lights in the tree next to my truck tent and a remote control light in the truck tent. And every night after it got dark, before I went to bed, I would go into the truck tent and turn that sound bar on with the loop of me snoring, and then ease into our cabin and go to sleep. I'd stay up as long as I could. Every once in a while, I would try and click the light on the inside of the tent. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't, but to give the impression that somebody was in that tent. I had put string traps up around camp and didn't really ever have any activity. The second to the last day I was there, I stayed in what we called our overwatch, which is upper part of the cabin, just small little enclosure with 4 windows. And I drug a road trip rocker up there, and I got in one corner, and I eased in without my head sticking up or anything else into that road trip rocker. And I stayed there from 9:30 or 10 in the morning till about 9:30 or 10 that night. During the latter part of the afternoon, I heard one wood knock. It was so light, it was if somebody had a little Astros souvenir bat and wrapped it on a tree, just slightly. And within 30 seconds, about 100 yards this side of the mountain, I heard a return, an even lighter knock. And then it hit me, this whole time I've been sitting here slamming that tree with that damn baseball bat. And all it is almost like a location signal telling each other where they are. When you go in there, you don't have one of these things watching you. You've probably got several of these things watching you. And that's just my take on it. Let's put it that way. One morning I came out of the cabin. It was early in the morning. Sun wasn't quite up. I opened the door and went to the little metal building out there to fire up the coffee pot and the Coleman lantern and the stove, make coffee and breakfast. Came back into the cabin to get my food out of the ice chest. And as I was walking back out, a rock hit the metal structure. And I turned around, and it happened so quick. I don't know what it was. All I saw was a large, dark brown, not black shape moving through the brush up the mountain. And I lost it. And I started screaming things I can't say on your podcast. I can see you and this, that, and the other. And I'm yelling, and I'm realizing I don't have a gun in my hand. It's sitting over there where the Coleman lantern is, and where I was about to make my coffee and my breakfast. And I'm screaming, and all of a sudden I hear up this side of the mountain, I heard movement, and over here I heard movement. So that told me that there were at least 3 animals there. What I saw, I couldn't tell you, other than, no, it wasn't a bear. It was brown, and it was big, and it moved through the brush and didn't make much noise at all. It crunched a couple of things as it stepped on it, but not much movement, nothing, like when you spook a deer and they haul through the brush or anything like that. But anyway, it. Got another picture on the slideshow that keeps popping through. During one of the rainstorms, I was sitting in my road trip rocker under the metal structure, and I heard something sailing through the tree cover and watched this nut flying at me. And it was a hickory nut about that big around. And I watched it bounce and come under the metal structure and land at my feet. And all I did was turn the camera straight down and took the picture. And that's the nut you see between my boots. Nuts don't fall out of the tree sideways.
No, sir.
Same thing with the rock. You'll see another picture of a rock, of course.
I tell you what, let's play this slideshow,
Okay.
and I will just let you give the backstory on each of the pictures.
Okay. This one was from Caddo Lake. This is, I could get my hand around it, but I couldn't have done what was done to that. This was a sapling that basically was bent over and twisted. And usually if a deer is rubbing its antlers or something, you can see on there where a deer rub has been. But this thing was actually, you can see it bent at the bottom, and it's bent and twisted there. And the further I walked, I found a couple of more, and they were going in the same direction. So this is what I could only describe as a limb twist. I don't know what did it. I found no tracks or footprints or anything else, but I thought it was interesting enough to take the picture. But this is on an island called Horse Island. It's not like an ATV came through there and did this. Yeah, bears, black bears could have done it, but what got me is if you look at it, it is twisted. I couldn't have done that. It was big enough to where even if I grabbed it with two hands, I'd have a hard time twisting something that size.
Well, so, Angelo, you just dropped a nugget that if, and so I want to point it out, and this is something that Kane Michael and Matthias Tipton taught us. If you find a sign, go into tracking mode and find your next sign. And you just said they were in the same direction. Mm-hmm. And that's basically what you can do in the field. If you find a sign, find the second sign, and then line them up and go into the and just start traveling, that direction. Now
after I found that, I went to the hardware store and I bought a bundle of the little orange survey flags. I went to Hobby Lobby and got some plaster and put it in Ziplocs and everything else and carried that in my ruck. Because I thought, well, if I found this once, maybe I could find it again, and I could actually mark with the flags and photograph where it was going. But this wasn't, like 20 yards apart or anything. This was almost 100 yards when I found the next one. And then I happened to find a third one. Where it led up, though, was a bunch of mayhaw bushes. You know what mayhaw is?
Yes.
Okay. Didn't find any footprints or tracks or anything else, but that was the direction it was going to. And the mayhaws grow on the edge of the swamp. Here's the rock. Basically, like I said, we've all had rocks thrown at us, but there's the rock that bounced through and hit my leg. And I put took the watch off my wrist to put it down for size comparison. It wasn't a very big rock, but this thing came bouncing in, and I stopped and took the picture. Next one.
coming up.
That's the truck tent. When I do sleep in my truck tent, that's basically what it looks like. Got a 45-70 there, sidearm. You see my camouflage camera when I'm in a leafy suit, brushed up or whatever. I've got that camera, and you don't see much, but that was what I used when I went on my solo trip as my decoy tent, was this truck tent. And the next one, there is the nut. And like I said, this was during a rainstorm, and I'm dry because I'm under the metal structure, but this thing came from across the creek from me, and I heard it go through the tree line and then watched it bounce towards me. Now, that time that Alton and I were there by ourselves, we had a big wooden pallet with a piece of plywood over it in front of the tent, so we could scrape our boots and such and not get debris all in the tent. We had turned in one evening. It sounded like a champagne cork going off. Didn't know what the heck it was. And we had picked up all the rocks and nuts out of our campsite. And this thing actually came from the mountain towards us. The popping sound was when it hit that wooden pallet with the piece of plywood over it, and then bounced past our tent. So they do throw nuts, they do throw rocks. I was never anywhere where you hear the rain of rocks. I wasn't involved in any of that, but there's no getting around what was going on. Everything that I've ever witnessed is just solitary stuff. I couldn't imagine being in the rain of rocks. This was taken from the inside of my truck. This is the tree that is arced across the trail. Wasn't there the day before. I couldn't have pulled that down. Now, could a black bear have crawled across that and pulled it down like that? Maybe. I don't know. But I just thought it was really odd that we had walked to the top of the mountain, back down, did our stuff, cleaned up camp the next day, and came out, and all of a sudden this is across the trail. So don't know what did it. Here is a place we had leased, and this is my 9x13 tent next to it, and the mountain is to the back side of that tent and structure there. That's where I heard the rock slide. That's where I had the animal during the rainstorm, between me and that structure right there, breathing. Now, the back side of the tent was what came in during the rainstorm. I don't know what the animal did, but the whole side of the tent just came in. Then you can see the big window in that cabin that I was talking about. I had pulled the bed away from that window, pulled it into the middle of that room, and that's what I was sleeping in the last night we were there. This is what Alton and Travis would show us. Basically, we find these, 2 or 3 of them. We've called them nut cracking stations. We don't know what they are, but there are nut husks, and obviously something with hands has put the rocks up there. This is not in a place where, trust me, where we are, there are no picnic tables and trailheads and things like that. But that is what we call a nut cracking station. This is when I was in with Porter and the other member. This is the same 9x13 tent with a awning out in front of it. And I was sleeping behind that chair right there in the tent. And the animal came down from the mountain and actually went in between my tent when I heard it walking away, coming out this way. Porter was just a little further to the right, set up in his tent. Now, this is the most interesting thing in all, of all. Go back to the Beagle. That's our dog Shiner. I go all kinds of places, fishing and this, that, and the other. Each time I get back from X, he circles the truck for a week. I could drive through a rainstorm and you see the mud is still caked to it and everything else. But there is a spot called the Mud Hole and another spot that actually has that ape scent to it, that primate scent to it. And he, for an entire week, will circle my truck when I get back. Can't stop him from doing it. And then the last photo. Okay, I don't do red circles or yellow circles or anything, but to show the guys what Alton and I witnessed, the tree is outlined in yellow. The red shows the windshield wiper or beagle wagging type movement that this tree made 40 yards up the mountain. A bear couldn't have done that. There's no way in hell a bear could move a tree that violently from side to side. Now I'm going to tell some other tales, and this is like there were four other members there. You can't make this stuff up. It was Alton and Todd Pickerton, Jody Blaylock, Chad Doris. We were all in together. Two of our members had walked to one location that we like to go to and check it out. And they're about a mile and a half or so from camp. They just started to walk back and a tree got pushed down or fell. They didn't see it happen. They heard it happen. They ran back. They investigated. They didn't see or hear anything. But how many times have you been in the woods and a tree falls? I mean, it's kind of a rare occurrence, but not an X. That afternoon, we hiked all over the place, here and there. That night, I'm sure the guys will correct me, and Jody will correct me if I'm wrong. If I'm not mistaken, that night, through the course of the night, we heard two more trees up the mountain come down. There was no wind, rain, anything. So that's 3 in one day. So there's my little red circle story there. Phone's blowing up. I don't know why. I don't have time to look at it right now. So anyway, getting back to our members, I'm humbled to be with these folks. I cannot tell you what all these people have accomplished, and their skill sets are just amazing. There's one guy I know that I've met and talked to and been around, but I've never been on a field op with him. Chris Buttenbaugh, they call him Q, like the quartermaster from James Bond. The guy comes up with I don't know how many gadgets. We have people who are so tech savvy, people that are so wildlife savvy, people that just, I mean, we got a couple of brothers that the Mellikers that come down from Illinois that, I mean, they can fix or build anything. I mean, the skill set is just amazing. I'm not going to go into the technology and what all, we've got going on right now, but it's all out on woodape.org. You can read all about it. We have a wonderful podcast called The Apes Among Us. Give a listen to some of those. They're really, really good. Now, Debbie asked me to do this. Debbie Jones asked me to do this, and I really appreciate it. But there are a lot more people in our group that could have done a better presentation than what I'm doing now. It is just amazing to hear, Alton or Michael Mays or Daryl Collier or any of these people speak. Paul Bowman Jr., smart guy. I mean, and like I said, some of the things that have happened to us there, Hollywood can't make up. Kathy probably told you about her sighting, and it's eye-opening to have something like that happen to you. And if I'm not mistaken, she was just in awe on how fast these animals moved back up that mountain. I've never really got a very good look at one of these animals. I've never seen one of these animals' faces or that much of a body. It's all fleeting glimpses, but it's not a man, and it's damn sure not somebody in a costume. Just to find where we are would be a feat. You could hear somebody if they were to drive in, but there's no way somebody could be out where we are punking us. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
The things out there are just, it's mind-boggling. And we've come very close to busting these animals before. And at some point in time, we're going to trip one of them up and get our type specimen. And then we can put mystery to bed and shut that entire valley down to hunting, encroachment, logging, everything. And
let me ask you this. So what is y'all's protocol when you do take a specimen?
No, I'm not going to.
And you don't have to go into specifics. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I'd rather not. That would be a question for one of our board members or, someone, but I'm not going into that.
I understand.
I will tell you this. I'm in what's called the camera corps. My job is to try and get the best footage I can of one of these animals. And I'm going to tell you what, I could remember chasing a pileated woodpecker in my boat, standing on the trolling motor in a 20-something mile an hour wind on Caddo Lake, trying to get a good picture of this pileated woodpecker and how long it took me. And I got a very, very good picture of it. You can see the reflection in its eye, the whole bit. Or just the other day, our hummingbirds are going nuts right now. And I'm trying to get a picture of a hummingbird for my wife. How hard it is just to get that perfect picture. And when you have these animals, that's all you're seeing is a fleeting glimpse. You have to be at the right place at the right time.
Right.
But there's things that we are doing that are starting to work, and we're kind of tripping these things up. They do their diversion tactics. Well, we're doing ours too, and it's working. So hopefully sometime soon, whether it's us or whether it's another group, somebody's going to put mystery to bed. We're not a bunch of loons, seeing something out there. This is an animal. This is a species of animal, and they're there. They're just not documented yet.
Well, I just want to say that, and I'm speaking for Larry too, that the North American Wood Ape Conservancy, they are a mentor for us. What y'all are doing in the field sets the bar, sets the example, and far as I'm concerned, it's the best thing since air conditioning, muscle cars, and yoga pants. And because there are so many groups out there, it's all, they make it almost like it's a competition, and they want to tear down other people, individuals, other groups, but not the NAWAC. Y'all are standing on your own merits and your own accomplishments. And I know that we're not going to have time for questions tonight, But I will ask everyone if you will put your questions in the comment section. We will. I know that Angelo will read those comments and answer those questions, because it's very, very, it's important for me to want to learn from others, and things that I have learned on my own. I want to share with others, and I think that's how we will move the ball up the field.
And that's one thing I appreciate about the NAWAC. They share all their field knowledge and their experiences. Every time somebody goes in, it's all documented, detailed, and they at some point publish it to the public for everybody to read to see what's going on. And I think that's cool, because most groups want to hide this little, whatever happened here, or don't want to give this detail. They generally give quite a bit of detail to their reports.
Yeah.
Well, I'll guarantee you one thing. I am not exaggerating anything that has happened to me. And I guarantee you that there will be people in our organization that if somebody were to exaggerate or not tell the truth about something that's going on there, they'd be taken to the woodshed in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
That's just the way it is. I don't want to be that person. So everything I've told you is what's happened to me.
Right.
You want to hear more about what's happened to other people or what we're doing, go to woodape.org, listen to the Apes Among Us, read what we have to put out there. If you'd like to become a member, we have associate members and we have investigators. It took me a while to become an investigator. You just don't go in there and say, hey, I want to be an investigator. I learned the hard way. You just don't go in there and say, I'm just going to sit in a tree stand and pop one of these things and it's going to be over with. That's not the way it works.
Yeah.
None of us wants to harm one of these animals, but it's going to happen. You're going to have to put a specimen on a slab for science, put it in their face and say, here it is. Now do your work. And then we can get to the conservation portion of our mission statement at that point. It just has to happen. Now, I will tell you this. My wife's from Arkansas, and she basically said, if you're out there and you or one of your guys pops one of those things, I don't think you're coming off that mountain. And I think in a way, she could be right. We don't know how they're going to act. They could try and defend, or they could run away. We don't know. I will tell you this. They have never done anything to hurt one of us. And something that can sit there and shake a goddamn tree like that so violently that the whole right side breaks off and comes crashing down, probably do whatever the heck it wanted to do to you. Okay?
Yeah, I agree.
So, but it's real, folks. And until we get our specimen or HD video or pictures or whatever we can do, or until another group does it, we're still going to be those people who were just, we saw Bigfoot, and I hate using that word, but we're out there trying. And I'm sure there are other groups out there trying too. So,
yeah.
Anyway.
Well, Sugar Britches, Larry, have you got any final comments?
Well, I appreciate Angelo coming on here and sharing his encounters. It's always intriguing to hear what goes on in Area X and to hear what happened to him at Caddo Lake. I've visited Caddo Lake. I've not been on the lake, but I've been there and ate fish and rode around in the different areas you can. And it's definitely a good spot to go look for sure.
It's prehistoric.
Yes, sir. No doubt.
It's really neat out there. They've got their problems as well. They've got the giant salvinia, an invasive plant that's taken over the lake. And they have other things going on right now, but it's another area that you want to help conserve.
Yeah.
So anyway,
Well,
guys, thank you so much, and just reach out when you get those questions in, and I'll try and answer them as quick as I can. And thank you for having me. Thank you, Debbie Jones. Thank you, Shelley. The ladies in the background. Like I told y'all earlier, if it's a Yamaha or a Chevy or something like that, I could work on it. If it comes to technology, I'm dumber than a rock.
Me too.
This is. Go ahead, Larry.
I was just going to say I can't work on the Yamaha or Chevy either.
I've seen you work on a boat motor in the Mississippi when we were stuck.
Yeah, that's true. And how did that go?
We got back to the ramp.
Yeah.
Well, we'd
That's
still
true.
be out there. But we want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. It was an awesome show, hearing these stories that Angelo has experienced. And I'm going to, tomorrow morning, I will put at the top of the comment section the woodape.org. And there's just so much information to learn on that. And everything from their sighting reports, the sighting map, detailed documentation of Tag 7 is, if you need to read it, because and not only to read it, but to study what our mentors have done in the field, because they set the bar and the example for all of us.
Yeah, and if you don't like reading, listen to the podcast, because they
Listen
go into
to the
great
podcast.
detail.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Me and Larry has listened to that several times while driving on the road, and just sit back and just listen to it. It is, it's what I aspire to be, as far as my own research efforts go, is because this is a great group. And but next week I will be in Brown Springs, Oklahoma. Yeah. And so we have a podcast that Bama and myself hosted with Jamie and Jeannie King, and it is fantastic. We will premiere it. So just tune in. You will not be sorry that you tuned in to hear how this husband and wife research team and what they've accomplished. So the chat room will be open, and we will see you again. Same bat time, same bat channel. Night, night, footers. Beast TV would like to welcome all of our new Facebook members. Be sure to check out our pictures and videos of possible evidence. And if you haven't checked out the Files tab, there is a wealth of information that you may find beneficial. If you would like to support Beast TV, check out our gear. We have coffee mugs, face masks, gaiters, shirts, and tank tops. The link is pinned at the top of the comment section. Everything is always marked down 20%. So come check out our junk.
This has been a Sawdust production.